dive into this whole birthright citizenship thing.
Mm-hmm.
You've asked us to really unpack President Trump's executive order and all the controversy around it. And we've got a pretty great selection of articles here from sources like the Times of India, Yahoo News, and even Al Jazeera. It's a really complex issue with global implications, and it seems to be raising a lot of questions.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic. I think one of the things that makes it so interesting is that it really touches on kind of key aspects of American identity and policy. We're talking about constitutional law, we're talking about immigration, even global perspectives on citizenship.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And to kind of kick things off here, did you know that the U.S. isn't actually alone in granting automatic citizenship to anyone born within its borders? It's true. Over 30 other countries, mostly in North and South America, have similar policies, even Canada.
Oh, yeah. That's a great point. Understanding the global context, I think, is really helpful here because it helps us see that this isn't just some uniquely American quirk. But, before we get into all that, how other countries handle this, I think it's worth making sure we're all on the same page about what birthright citizenship actually means, in the U.S. context.
Yeah, exactly. So we're talking about the principle of jus soli,
yeah,
which essentially means right of the soil.
Yeah.
And the U.S. principle is enshrined in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. This amendment grants citizenship to anyone born on U.S. soil, regardless of their parents' immigration status.
And it's,
It's worth noting that this amendment has some pretty deep historical roots.
Yeah.
It was passed in 1868,
Yeah.
right after the Civil War, with the primary aim of guaranteeing citizenship for freed slaves.
Yeah. Wow. Talk
Yeah.
about a powerful legacy. But now,
Yeah.
fast forward to today, we have President Trump entering the scene with this executive order aiming to end birthright citizenship for children of undocumented immigrants and those here on temporary visas. Right. And this is where things get particularly complex, I think, and potentially contentious, because legal experts are saying that, Trump can't simply change the Constitution unilaterally with an executive order. It's just not how the system works.
Yeah.
So this is really setting the stage for potentially, epic legal battles that could very well end up in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, a real constitutional showdown brewing. But before we delve into the, potential legal ramifications of all this, let's zoom in on who would actually be impacted by this proposed change.
Yeah, so one of the most directly affected groups, of course, would be children of undocumented immigrants, just to give you a sense of scale here. In 2022 alone, over 250,000 babies were born in the U.S. to parents who are undocumented. So if birthright citizenship were to end, this could potentially create a huge population of individuals living in the U.S. without legal status.
Right, and it's not just limited to children of undocumented immigrants either. This executive order also has implications for people on temporary visas, including the H-1B visa, which is very common among skilled workers.
Yeah.
Particularly those from India.
Yeah, precisely. Imagine the situation. You're a tech worker from India. You're here on an H-1B visa. Your child is born in the U.S. And suddenly, under this new order, that child wouldn't automatically be a U.S. citizen. It would just add a whole new layer of complexity to an already complicated and often controversial visa program.
Yeah. And let's not forget about other groups on temporary visas, too. Tourists, students, anyone in that category would need to carefully consider the implications this could have for any children they might have while in the U.S.
Right. The potential ripple effects are massive.
Yeah.
And to understand sort of the range of approaches to this, let's take a quick look at the UK. They have a much more restrictive system where at least one parent needs to be a citizen or have permanent resident status for their child born in the UK to automatically receive citizenship.
So a very different system indeed. But even with these contrasts, it's crucial to remember that the U.S. isn't an outlier. When it comes to offering birthright citizenship, remember those 30 other countries we mentioned earlier? This global perspective, I think, helps us see that. There are multiple ways to approach this concept of citizenship, and the U.S. system isn't the only valid one.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that these debates are happening within a broader global context, and different countries have different perspectives on how to handle these issues.
And those differing perspectives lead to some pretty heated debates. There are strong arguments being made on both sides of this issue. But before we get into those, let's take a quick break and come back to dissect the different arguments for and against birthright citizenship.
Welcome back to our deep dive into birthright citizenship. Before the break, we were talking about how this debate is, playing out on a global stage with different countries taking very different approaches.
Right, and that global perspective is definitely illuminating. But now I think it's time to really dig into the heart of the matter here in the U.S. What are the most compelling arguments being made on both sides of this issue?
Yeah. So let's start with some of the arguments against birthright citizenship. One of the, I think one of the biggest concerns we hear is this idea of what some people call anchor babies.
Yeah, that's a term that gets thrown around a lot in this debate.
Yeah.
Can you break down like what it actually means and why it's such a contentious point?
Sure. So the term anchor baby is often used,
Yep.
kind of pejoratively by those who believe that. Some undocumented immigrants have children in the U.S., specifically as a way to gain a foothold in the country. The idea is that by having a child who is automatically a U.S. citizen, those parents might then be able to leverage that child's status to stay in the U.S. themselves, or perhaps even gain citizenship down the line.
So the concern is that people are essentially using the child's citizenship as a way to circumvent immigration laws.
Exactly. And this ties into a broader concern, I think, about the potential strain on social services. Some argue that, undocumented immigrants who have children in the U.S. are placing an unfair burden on systems like healthcare, education, welfare.
But isn't it true that many undocumented immigrants actually contribute to the economy and pay taxes, even if they aren't eligible for all of the same benefits as citizens?
That's a crucial point and speaks to, I think, the complexity of this issue. It's not a black and white situation.
Yeah.
Many undocumented immigrants do pay taxes. Even if they don't have full access to social services, they contribute to the economy through their work. They pay sales taxes, and they often pay property taxes indirectly through their rents. Some even pay income taxes using an individual taxpayer identification number, or ITN.
So the economic picture is far more nuanced than some might assume. But what about the flip side? What are some of the most compelling arguments in favor of keeping birthright citizenship?
Well, one of the most powerful arguments centers on this principle of equality. A principle that is deeply ingrained in the American identity. Proponents of birthright citizenship argue that it ensures everyone born on U.S. soil has an equal chance to participate in American society, regardless of their parents' background or legal status.
And that idea of equality ties directly back to the historical context of the 14th Amendment right. It was designed to guarantee citizenship for newly freed slaves after the Civil War.
Precisely. So for many, birthright citizenship is seen as kind of a direct embodiment of the 14th Amendment, and it's aimed to right a historical wrong by ensuring that everyone born in the U.S. has equal protection under the law.
So in essence, it's about upholding the fundamental principles of the U.S. Constitution.
Right. And beyond sort of the legal and historical arguments, there are also, I think, some very practical considerations.
What do you mean by practical considerations?
Well, think about the potential consequences of ending birthright citizenship. If we were to go down that road, we could very well end up with a large and ever-growing population of people who are born in the U.S. but don't have clear legal status.
It sounds like it would create a lot of instability and uncertainty for both those individuals and for American society as a whole.
Exactly. And it could also lead to social and economic marginalization. I mean, imagine people who were born and raised in the U.S. but are denied access to education, healthcare, or employment opportunities because they lack legal status.
It's almost like creating a second-class citizenry within the U.S. itself.
That's a really apt way to put it. And that scenario raises, I think, some pretty profound questions about what kind of society we want to be and what values we want to prioritize. Do we want to be a country that embraces inclusivity and offers opportunity to all who are born here? Or do we want to move towards a more restrictive model of citizenship, one that is more focused on lineage and legal status? These are the big questions that this debate ultimately, I think, forces us to confront.
Those are definitely some heavy questions. So where do you think this this deep dive leads us now that we've explored both sides of this incredibly complex issue?
Well, I think it's clear that there are no easy answers when it comes to birthright citizenship. There are, valid arguments to be made on both sides, and the potential consequences of any change to this longstanding policy are, far-reaching and multifaceted. But what's perhaps even more important than the specific arguments themselves is the fact that this debate shines a light on some of the most fundamental questions about what it means to be American.
You're right. It really gets to the core of our national identity. It forces us to ask who belongs here, who gets to be a citizen, and how do we balance the rights of individuals with the interests of the nation as a whole?
Exactly. And these are questions that are only going to become more pressing. As the legal battles over President Trump's executive order continue to unfold, this is an issue that will likely be debated in courtrooms and in the public sphere for many years to come.
It's definitely an issue that deserves our attention and thoughtful consideration. But before we go any further down that road, I think it's important to take a step back and look at how the U.S. system of birthright citizenship compares to approaches in other countries around the world.
That's a great idea. Sometimes getting that global perspective can help us better understand our own systems and see things in a new light.
As we've already seen the U.S. approach to, birthright citizenship isn't as unique as some people might think. So in the next part of our deep dive, we'll take a trip around the world and explore the diverse ways that nations grapple with this concept of violates, citizenship and belonging. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been, talking about this whole birthright citizenship issue, and I think now it's time to broaden our horizons a bit and see how the U.S. system compares to other countries around the world.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Sometimes getting that global perspective can really illuminate things. It helps us understand whether a particular approach is unique or part of a larger trend.
Exactly. So tell me, is the U.S. really the only country that grants automatic citizenship to, anyone born within its borders?
Not at all, actually. You might be surprised to learn that more than 30 countries around the world grant birthright citizenship. It's particularly common in the Americas, both North and South.
Wow, I honestly had no idea it was that widespread. So it seems like the U.S. system isn't as unusual as some people might think.
Precisely. In fact, the U.S. approach is very similar to that of its neighbors. Canada, both countries have a long-standing tradition of what's called jus, which means right of the soil. So being born on their soil generally grants you citizenship.
That makes sense given the close, historical and cultural ties between the U.S. and Canada. But what about other parts of the world? How do they handle this issue?
Well, Europe tends to have a more restrictive approach. Many European countries have moved away from unrestricted birthright citizenship in recent decades, and they've adopted systems that require at least one parent to be a citizen or have permanent resident status in order for a child born there to automatically gain citizenship.
So it's more about your parent's status than your place of birth in those countries.
Exactly. The UK is a good example of this. If you were to have a child in the UK, that child wouldn't automatically become a British citizen unless you or your partner were already a British citizen or had settled status there.
Interesting. So it seems like there's a real spectrum of approaches to birthright citizenship around the world. Some countries are very open and inclusive, while others are more limited and focus on the citizenship of the parents.
That's a great observation. And there are even some countries that have shifted their policies over time. Australia, for example, used to have unrestricted birthright citizenship, but they changed their laws back in 1986. Now, like in the UK, at least one parent needs to be an Australian citizen or permanent resident for a child born there to automatically receive citizenship.
So even those countries that once had a strong tradition of jus have been willing to adapt their approach based on evolving social and political dynamics.
Absolutely. It highlights the fact that citizenship laws aren't static. They evolve and shift over time to reflect a country's changing values, priorities, and even its relationship with the rest of the world.
This global perspective is really eye-opening. I think it shows that this whole debate about birthright citizenship isn't just happening in a vacuum here in the U.S. It's part of a much larger global conversation about migration identity and belonging in the 21st century.
Right, and that conversation is only going to become more important as the world becomes increasingly interconnected and people move across borders more fluidly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm wondering what key takeaways you would leave our listener with. What's the big picture here?
Well, I think this exploration has shown us that birthright citizenship is an incredibly complex issue with profound implications. There are strong arguments to be made on both sides, and the potential consequences of ending birthright citizenship in the U.S. are far-reaching and multifaceted, but perhaps more importantly, it's clear that this debate goes beyond just legal technicalities. It touches on fundamental questions about who we are as a nation and who we want to be in the future.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It really forces us to grapple with some of the core tenets of what it means to be American, who belongs here, what are the rights and responsibilities of citizenship, and how do we reconcile our commitment to equality with the realities of managing immigration in a globalized world.
Those are some of the most essential questions of our time, and while we may not have all the answers, I think this deep dive has provided some valuable insights and food for thought.
I completely agree. It's given us a much deeper understanding of this complex issue, its historical roots, the global context, and the human stories at the heart of this debate. So to our listener, as you continue to grapple with this issue, we encourage you to keep an open mind, engage thoughtfully with the arguments on both sides, and consider the human impact of any potential policy changes.
Well said, because ultimately, this isn't just an abstract legal debate. It's about real people, real families, and the very fabric of our nation.
And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into birthright citizenship. Thanks for joining us, and we hope this has been an informative and thought-provoking journey.